of 1978. It's a Sunday afternoon in Sacramento, winter of 1978. The kind of quiet that settles over a neighborhood when everyone's inside, curtains half drawn, sunlight dull through the fog. A faint breeze rattles a wind chime on a porch, the sound almost peaceful. Almost. At 5:45 p.m., a call reaches the Sacramento Police Department. It's a concerned neighbor. She hasn't seen Teresa Wallen all day. No movement, no sound. Her car still in the driveway. A patrol car is dispatched, just a welfare check, nothing urgent. When the officers arrive, they find the front door slightly open. One of them, Officer Clark, pushes it gently. The hinges moan. Inside, the air feels wrong. Too still, too thick, carrying that metallic scent that officers recognize instantly blood. The living room looks undisturbed. A folded blanket on the couch. A baby photo on the wall. Everything is ordinary until the first step into the hallway. That's when they see it. A streak of red leading to the bedroom. Clark calls for backup, his voice shaking slightly. He rounds the corner, gun drawn, and freezes. The scene inside is beyond comprehension. The young woman lies motionless, her body positioned unnaturally, the world around her drenched in crimson. The walls, the floor, even the mirror, all bear evidence of a ritualistic frenzy. The investigators who would arrive later could barely describe what they saw without trembling. On the counter in the adjoining kitchen, a coffee mug, half filled with dark red liquid. Next to it, a bloodied knife and a pair of empty, orange juice cartons, one stained inside as though used for something it was never meant to hold. This wasn't just a murder. It was consumption. Detectives would later say it was like walking into the home of something not human, an animal that believed itself a god. The officers step outside, shaken and pale. Within hours, the home is surrounded by squad cars, yellow tape, and whispers. But the man responsible, he's already gone. Just another face in the crowd, driving slowly down the road, hands still trembling, tasting copper on his lips. Richard Trenton Chase was born in 1950. To the outside world, he looked like any other boy, quiet, pale, distant. But inside, his mind was already unspooling. His father, a man of rigid rules and heavy hands, demanded obedience. His mother, anxious and erratic, spent long hours locked in her room, whispering to herself. Home wasn't safe. It was a place where silence screamed. By age 10, Richard had already started showing the early signs of darkness. He wet the bed until his teens. He tortured animals, neighborhood cats, stray dogs, even birds. And sometimes he set small fires in the backyard, watching the flames reflect in his wide, unblinking eyes. Teachers described him as disconnected, floating somewhere else. He'd stare at walls for hours, scratching at his arms as though something were crawling under his skin. When he hit puberty, things got worse. He became obsessed with the idea that he was dying, that his heart wasn't beating properly, that his veins were collapsing, that his blood was drying up. He'd press his fingers against his chest, muttering, but stopped again. It's not moving. Doctors told him it was anxiety. His parents told him to stop acting crazy. But the delusion took root, deep and unshakable. By the time Richard reached high school, he was spiraling. He began drinking heavily, smoking marijuana daily, experimenting with LSD and amphetamines. The drugs didn't create his madness. They just stripped away the last layer of control. He moved into an apartment with a few friends. But even they noticed the smell. Dead animals. Blood on the floor. A blender in the kitchen with something dark and thick inside. When they confronted him, he smiled, a vacant, eerie smile, and said, "It's for my blood disease." They kicked him out. When they cleaned his room, they found dead cats in jars, entrails in bowls, and blood smeared on the refrigerator door. It was as though he had been practicing, preparing for something worse. Richard's descent was swift. In 1975, police found him in the Nevada desert, naked, covered in blood, and clutching a bucket filled with the remains of a cow. When asked whose blood it was, he replied calmly, It came out of me. He was admitted to a psychiatric hospital. The doctors diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia and psychosis with blood delusions. They found he believed that his arteries were turning to dust, that UFOs were controlling his body, and that someone, the Nazis, he said, were poisoning him through soap and shampoo. Inside the hospital, the behavior continued. Chase began catching birds that landed on the windowsill. He'd snap their necks, drain the blood, and drink it. Other patients avoided him. Nurses called him Dracula. After a year, he was released. Doctors said medication had stabilized him. His mother, against medical advice, took him off the drugs. Within weeks, Richard began hearing voices again. He moved into a small Sacramento apartment, alone. The walls were yellowed from cigarettes, the carpet stiff from dried blood. He kept raw organs in the refrigerator, both animal and human. When police would later search it, they'd find brains, kidneys, and a jar labeled blend. He started killing rabbits, dogs, and even neighborhood pets, drinking their blood and blending their organs with Coca-Cola. He believed the mixture kept his heart beating, but soon it wasn't enough. On December 29, 1977, Richard drove down Watt Avenue with a .22 caliber handgun. He saw 51-year-old Ambrose Griffin unloading groceries with his wife. Chase rolled down the window and pulled the trigger. A single shot, then another. Griffin fell instantly. His wife screamed, thinking it was fireworks. The city didn't know it yet, but Sacramento had just met its vampire. The murder of Teresa Wallen shocked Sacramento. Even seasoned detectives couldn't comprehend the brutality. The crime scene photos, sealed for decades, revealed something beyond violence. It was desecrated. Every motion, every wound, felt deliberate yet deranged. The coroner's report read like a nightmare. Multiple stab wounds, organ removal, and evidence of post-mortem mutilation. Blood loss was extreme, but not all of it was found at the scene. That fact alone made the lead investigator, Lieutenant Thomas, pause. He leaned over the report, tapping his pen. Where did the rest go? No one had an answer. By morning, word spread among the department. Rumors of ritual killings, satanic symbols, even cannibalism. The press was kept away. For now. But whispers started circulating through Sacramento's neighborhoods. Mothers locked their doors twice. Children were told not to answer knocks. The newspapers called it the Madman murders. Meanwhile, Richard Chase was watching the coverage from his apartment. His hair was greasy, his skin pale, eyes sunken like two black holes. The room around him smelled of rot. On the walls, he'd drawn crude symbols. Crosses, circles, lines connecting nothing. He believed they protected him from the creatures. He watched the TV, fingers trembling. When the anchor mentioned the police had no leads, Richard smiled faintly. He took it as a sign. That night, he began driving again. He didn't hunt people at first. He hunted houses, testing doors, one after another. He had a rule. If the door was locked, he moved on. If it was open, it meant he was invited. He wandered for hours, lost in his delusion, searching for the next open door. On January 27, 1978, the door opened again. The house belonged to Evelyn Miroth, a 38-year-old woman babysitting her friend's toddler. Her own 6-year-old son, Jason, was homesick. A visiting neighbor, Dan Meredith, had stopped by to check on her. At 11:00 a.m., neighbors heard a single gunshot, then silence. By 11:30, another neighbor, sensing something was wrong, peeked through a side window and froze. Blood on the floor. A body near the hallway. Police arrived minutes later. Inside, the scene was worse than the first. 4 victims. 3 adults, 1 child, all killed with the same. A .22 caliber weapon used in the Wallen case. The level of mutilation was unspeakable. The investigators, hardened men, had to step outside to breathe. In the bathroom, they found the most horrifying detail of blood, smeared cups sitting beside the tub. Detectives realized they weren't dealing with a typical serial killer. This was something else, someone completely detached from humanity. Someone who believed the blood itself was his salvation. When the lab confirmed matching shell casings from both crime scenes, panic erupted. Sacramento was no longer safe. The police released the first warning to the public: lock your doors. Report anything suspicious. The killer may strike again. Helicopters began circling neighborhoods. Reporters whispered words like vampire and ritual. For the first time in its history, the city went dark with fear. Inside the department, a task force was formed. The detectives began rechecking every firearm purchase in the area. One name stood out: Richard Trenton Chase, who had bought a .22 pistol recently. His record showed previous psychiatric confinement. The pieces were beginning to fit. When officers visited his apartment complex, neighbors described a thin, sick-looking man who wore dirty clothes and often carried dead animals in paper bags. One woman said she saw him once kneeling over something in the grass. It was a cat. She never saw that cat again. Detectives obtained a search warrant. January 28, 1978. Late afternoon. Unmarked police cars roll silently toward the apartment complex. Detectives Don Mott and Robert Ressler from the FBI's behavioral unit are among them. Ressler, one of the first true criminal profilers, had been studying patterns in serial crime for years. When he saw the details of Chase's murders, he said quietly, "He's killing to survive." In his mind, he's dying. The officers line the hallway, the air heavy with the smell of rot even through the closed door. Detective Mott knocks. No response. He knocks again, louder. Inside, footsteps. Then silence. Mott signals to his team. They pull back slightly. Suddenly, the door swings open, and there he is. Richard Chase stands in the doorway, pale as bone, eyes hollow, clothes smeared with stains. In his hands, a blood-stained cardboard box. The detective's voice is calm. Richard Chase. Chase just stares, blinking slowly. Then he tries to close the door. The officers push through. Chase stumbles backward, hissing like an animal, but he doesn't fight. He looks confused, almost dazed, as they handcuff him. The stench inside is unbearable. The carpet is sticky, dishes crusted with blood. In the refrigerator, jars of body parts, animal remains, and containers labeled blood. On the counter, a blender caked with a red residue. It's not insanity anymore. It's evidence. Detectives move through the apartment in silence, documenting everything. The walls are covered in childish drawings of human anatomy. The bed is soaked. There's a calendar on the nightstand with X's marking dates. The same dates as the murders. When one of the officers opens the freezer, he quietly closes it again. He doesn't speak for several minutes. They've found what was left of Evelyn Meroth and her children. At the station, Chase sits quietly in the interrogation room. The detectives expect denial, panic, excuses. But Chase just speaks softly, almost politely. "They were already dead," he says. "I didn't kill them. I needed the blood." He explains his delusions in a chilling calm. He believes his own blood is turning to powder. That someone, Nazis, UFOs, or poisoners, is stealing it. That he has to replace it to stay alive. When asked why he drank animal blood, he says, "Animals die too fast. They don't have enough." There's no malice in his voice, only conviction. Detective Ressler later described it best. He wasn't a monster in his own mind. He was a patient treating his disease. The trial began in 1979, and by then Sacramento was a city holding its breath. The name Richard Trenton Chase had become synonymous with evil. Newspapers called him the Vampire of Sacramento. Television anchors spoke his name like a curse. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was suffocating. Journalists packed the benches. Families of the victims sat in silence, holding photographs. reminders of the lives stolen. At the defense table sat a thin, pale man in an oversized orange jumpsuit. His hair hung lifeless. His eyes wandered, unfocused, as though he were staring through walls. That was Richard Chase. When the proceedings began, District Attorney Ron Davis rose to speak. His voice was sharp, controlled, and cold. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "what you are about to hear is not madness alone. It is a method. It is murder. Deliberate, repeated, and fueled by obsession." He detailed every crime, every scene, the evidence too brutal to describe fully. The room was silent except for the soft clicking of typewriters and the distant hum of the air vent. Then came the defense. Chase's attorney didn't argue the facts. He couldn't. The evidence was overwhelming. Fingerprints, the murder weapon, the blood in his apartment. Instead, he argued for insanity. That Chase was not responsible for his actions because he could no longer tell reality from delusion. He brought in psychiatrists, experts who explained the disease that had devoured Richard's mind. Paranoid schizophrenia of the most severe kind. Dr. Kessler, one of the state's top forensic psychiatrists, described him as a man who believed he was dying from within. He spoke softly, almost mournfully. He wasn't hunting victims for pleasure. He truly believed their blood was medicine. Some jurors shifted uncomfortably. Others stared at Chase, searching for signs of remorse. But there was none. When asked to speak, Richard's words chilled the courtroom. He told the judge, "If I don't get blood, I'll die. They took my veins. The soap poisons me." He said it plainly, without emotion, as if explaining a simple fact. The courtroom felt smaller in that moment, the fluorescent lights too bright, the air too heavy. Everyone could see it, the complete collapse of a human mind. But the law is not built on pity. The prosecution countered with their own experts, who testified that Chase knew what he was doing, that his method of hiding evidence, his attempt to flee, and his coherent conversations afterward proved awareness of guilt. The argument was simple: madness may explain why he killed, but it does not erase that he killed. The jury deliberated for 5 hours. When they returned, the room fell silent. The verdict: guilty on 6 counts of first-degree murder. The sentence: death in the gas chamber at San Quentin State Prison. No one cheered. No one spoke. Even the prosecutor looked haunted. Because everyone understood what that verdict really meant. Not just the end of a killer, but the failure of a system that had once declared him stable and set him free. San Quentin Prison. Concrete walls, flickering lights, the distant clatter of steel doors. Richard Chase spent his days in near silence. Other inmates avoided him. Some mocked him, calling him Dracula. Others feared him, whispering stories about how he would stare at them without blinking, his lips moving in unheard prayers. He rarely ate. Guards reported he believed the food was poisoned. He would press his neck, whispering, "They're taking it again. The blood's leaving me." He wrote letters to the FBI, to doctors, even to random strangers. Long, rambling pages about UFOs, blood theft, Nazi conspiracies, and invisible rays draining his energy. He signed each letter, "Yours in suffering, R.T. Chase." The psychiatrists who visited said his delusions had grown worse. His mind was now a maze with no exit. In December 1980, nearly 2 years after his conviction, guards found him lying still on his bunk. The air in the cell was heavy, motionless. On the small metal table beside him sat an empty packet of antidepressants. Pills he had been hoarding for months. He had taken them all at once. At 30 years old, the vampire of Sacramento was dead, but the guards who found him said he looked strangely peaceful, as if, for the first time in his life, he believed the blood had finally stopped leaving his body. The story of Richard Chase is not just the story of murder. It's the story of how the mind can disintegrate, slowly, silently, until what's left is something unrecognizable. He wasn't the clever serial killer Hollywood imagines. He was a man consumed by delusion, untreated and unprotected, wandering into the darkest corner of his own thoughts until reality dissolved completely. When people talk about monsters, they often look for horns and claws. But the real horror of Richard Chase is that he looked like any of us, thin, tired, pale. A man on a street corner. A man at a bus stop. A man asking for help no one ever truly gave. In the end, his crimes were not born from hatred. They were born from fear, the most primal kind, the fear of dying, of vanishing from inside out. And so he took what he believed he needed, until there was nothing left of him but blood, fear, and silence. Because sometimes, Hood, the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones hiding under our beds. They're the ones who have lost their way inside their own minds.